Two hurricanes not of any real concern in the tropics, but the conveyor belt in the Atlantic, it's in full swing, cranking out more disturbances that we are monitoring closely. We have the latest models, plus a meteorologist Q&A coming your way here on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing. Hey there, folks, live in your hurricane headquarters, our trio of meteorologists today. Wes Hohenstein joining us from CBS 17, the chief meteorologist up there. We've got Chief Meteorologist Jeff Berardelli, Meteorologist Rebecca Barry here to answer your questions live. You can use any of the hashtags on your screen, but there's a lot to talk about with the peak of hurricane season right around the corner. We're tracking Danielle, we're tracking Earl, and we're doing so with Jeff Berardelli, who's going to head over to the wall and explain what we're looking at here on live satellite. Jeff, it's quite busy out there in the Atlantic.
Finally. That's what I would say. It took quite a while for it to happen, but it is really starting to pick up, although nothing is a threat to land, at least here in the United States, which of course is good news. So let's show you an overview of the tropics. First of all, that is Earl, which is a hurricane. That is Danielle, which, crazy, it actually had winds of 75. Now it's back to winds of 80 miles an hour here, but this is going to be weakening over the next 24 to 48 hours, becoming a tropical storm again, and then just becoming extra tropical. And there's a couple of other areas we're watching, one to the west-northwest here of the Cape Verde Islands, and then another one about to emerge off of Africa. So let's talk about one by one what's going on. So in terms of this system right here, which is Hurricane Earl, this is actually forecast to become a major hurricane, maybe as early as tomorrow, which means it would probably undergo some rapid intensification before it makes its way just to the east, luckily, likely missing a direct hit with Bermuda. That's good news there. And then, of course, that's Danielle, which is still maintaining its intensity. And one of the reasons it's really warm in the North Atlantic. I'm going to show you that in a couple of seconds. So this area of red right here, there's a 70% chance of development, a high chance of development. But notice that the basic track of this is going to take it probably into the central Atlantic, so it's likely never to become a threat to the U.S. And right behind it, there's another wave which is still emerging off Africa right now. There is some chance, although it's a low chance of development over the next couple of days, but perhaps later in the period, it will start to have a better chance of developing into a tropical system. So there's still lots of stuff to talk about over the next couple of weeks, as it does look like it's going to remain active. The real question is, are any of these storms going to make it to the United States? And is there a prohibitive amount of wind shear and dry air in the tropics, which are going to stop these systems from really becoming strong in the main development region? All right, so this is a close-up view of Hurricane Earl. It's still a Cat 1, but remember, we do expect that this is going to become a Cat 2 and eventually a Cat 3 hurricane. So here are the spaghetti tracks, and there's lots of spaghetti on the map, as you can see. Earl is going to track to the north-northeast, as you can see. Invest 95L, which is the one with a high chance of development, that is likely to swing out into the middle of the Atlantic and never be a problem. And then behind that, we'll have to continue to watch what happens with that wave that moves off of Africa. So let's talk about the next week and what it looks like in terms of dust. And I'll step out of the picture so you can see a clear view of it. And there's still a decent amount of Saharan dust coming off of Africa. This is not prohibitive, if you will. However, it does kind of muddy the waters a little, make it a little more difficult for systems to form. And in addition, the wind shear has been very high so far this summer. It continues to be fairly high across the Atlantic, and the wind shear is basically the winds in the upper part of the atmosphere, which tend to kind of disturb these circulations and really don't allow them to become very strong in many cases. So as you can see, all that red and even the orange is somewhat prohibitive for tropical development, and there's still a decent amount. Now, we see a little less of that as we head towards the weekend and early next week, but nevertheless, there's still a decent amount for this time of year. Let's compare recent seasons. So at this point in 2020, we had 17 named storms. Last year, we were way up there at 14 named storms. And yeah, things have finally started to pick up, but we're still way below where we've been the past couple of years. All right, so let's talk about what kind of should have happened, right? When we look at a season, we oftentimes will look at whether or not we have La Nina or El Nino. Months ahead of time, we try to predict what may happen. And just about every seasonal forecaster said it was likely to be an active season, and that's because we have a moderate La Nina happening in the Atlantic right here. As you can see, cool water in the equatorial Pacific. Now, the one thing that doesn't come up in conversation very much, but there is very warm water here in the eastern Pacific Ocean. That could be throwing a kind of a monkey wrench into the Atlantic right now, and especially the Caribbean earlier in the season. Now, as we look at the Atlantic water temperatures, well, it's the 6th warmest since 1982 in the deep tropical Atlantic. So that's certainly not a mitigating factor or pushing back against tropical systems. But I do think that the very warm water in the North Atlantic is playing a role. And notice how the subtropics here are a little bit cooler than they would otherwise typically be. So let's talk about a textbook pattern, and then we're going to bring it back to Wes and to Rebecca and to JB. But the textbook pattern, if you really want an active season, you'd have a pretty strong area of high pressure, sometimes termed the Bermuda High, across the central part of the Atlantic. And the clockwise wind flow would guide these tropical systems from the Cape Verde Islands across the basin, and also stop the wind shear and stop the jet stream, if you will, from penetrating to the south, and also the dry air. But this year, present basically on top of where we have that really extremely warm water in the North Atlantic, we also have generally had an area of high pressure. So the high pressure in the central Atlantic has been very weak and almost non-existent. And what that has done is allowed this jet stream, or we call it wave breaking between us meteorologists, but it basically just means that the jet stream is not just heading straight west to east, it's actually kind of carving a path, almost like the Colorado River. And by doing so, it's allowing dry air to penetrate from the mid-latitudes into the tropics, and in addition, allowing a lot of wind shear into the tropics. And that hasn't stopped yet. So the real question is are we going to see this let up, or is this going to be the prevailing pattern as we take you through the rest of September and also into, let's say, October as well? And of course, as we head towards October, we start to look a little bit more towards the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico for development. For the month of September, though, these are the areas that we watch most closely, especially in the Atlantic, where it is very active right now. All right, I'm going to step back to the desk. In the meantime, I'll toss it back to JB, and we'll get started on our Q&A.
Let's bring in our featured meteorologist today, Wes Hohenstein, joining us from CBS 17. Wes, your big takeaway. We haven't, of course, you've been on the program so many times, but as far as your big takeaway with where we are so far in September, when really the peak of hurricane season is right here around the corner in just a couple of days, what's your big takeaway so far?
What a contrast in years. I mean, Jeff showed the graphic. I mean, last couple of years, we've all been saying, meteorologists and just residents alike along the coast, okay, that's enough. No more hurricanes, because they kept coming and coming and coming. And now this year, I kind of feel like it's so calm. Everyone's like, meteorologists and residents alike, where are the hurricanes? Now we're asking for them almost. Not that we want one, but it's such a strange season. And then you get these two hurricanes out there right now, Danielle and Earl. How on earth is Danielle that strong in the North Atlantic? I know Jeff talked about the warm water, but how is that happening? And then how is Earl holding on when, yeah, there's not as much dry air and upper level wind to damage these storms, but how is Earl holding on when there's still some problems out there that would usually be conducive for a storm to develop? So just a strange year, but I gotta think there is no way that we're having the season that everyone thought we would. And guys, I don't know, you tell me what you think. And I don't think there's any way that we even get to an average season of 14 named storms.
And let's not forget that at the beginning of the season, we had the NOAA and CSU preseason forecast come out. They forecasted a above average season, Rebecca, and we thought it was going to, oh, here we go again. But so far it's been, look, this is what we like. We like storms going north in the Atlantic, not west in the Atlantic.
And it does only take one storm, of course, to make it a bad year for you if it ends up affecting you. But when we do see these high number of named storms, we keep in mind that the satellites are so much better now than they used to be. And so we are naming systems that previously perhaps would not have been noticed or named when we didn't have that kind of technology. And so I still think that it's possible for us to get to that 14 named systems out there just because we do name so many systems now that we didn't previously, most of the time, that don't end up affecting anyone. They're out there. They're the fish storms, so to speak, especially the shorter-lived fish storms. But what we're seeing right now is typical activity increasing across the Atlantic basin as we approach the peak of the season. Usually we're tracking the highest number of named systems out there that second week in September, and that's certainly ringing true for this year since we haven't had anything to track until about now. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do go below average, but I do think that since we do name so many systems that we previously didn't, we might end up closer to average.
You see all the hashtags around your screen. I want to get to some of the questions that are coming in out of the Facebook Live comment section. For those of you who've been with us on the program, you know how this works. Use a hashtag, ask a question to any of our meteorologists here on Tracking the Tropics. And Courtney Estrada from the WFLA Facebook page says, hashtag KJB. Jeff, Wes, I've heard you all mention the spot/patch to the west of Africa that has cooler water, in quotes. How cool is it compared to the water around it? I hope that made sense.
It does make sense, yeah. It's only about a degree cooler at most. It's not much cooler, but when you look at the rest of the Atlantic, which is extraordinarily warm right now, it does kind of stand out. But it makes some sense, right? If we're advecting, winds down in that direction, we probably have a little upwelling there. In addition, the warm air has been concentrated in the northern Atlantic Ocean, likely as a result of that ridge of high pressure kind of placing itself there. It's not the opposite way around, usually at least, although they can certainly compound each other. Point being that the weather pattern is likely driving the oceanic distribution of temperatures, I would say, more so. But nevertheless, it's a good question, and it's just a slightly cooler, but it does go to show you that we have kind of a strange ocean temperature, sea surface temperature pattern across the Atlantic right now. And oftentimes these sea surface temperature patterns in the Atlantic and Pacific do dictate where storms form. There is, in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, I think I can probably just press this button and it would go backwards. So hold on a second, let me see if I can do that. I don't know. Well, at the beginning of this graphic, the Eastern Pacific Ocean is warm in the Eastern Pacific, which I think may have kind of tamped down on activity in the Caribbean early in the season. But that is now kind of withering away, that warmer water. So I do wonder if we'll end up with a very active October in the Caribbean, which I don't want to jinx anybody, because especially us here in Tampa. But I mean, there's been a little bit of talk about that as well. Wes, do you want to chime in about the odd distribution of temperatures across the Atlantic?
Yeah, it is strange. Like I referenced, Danielle holding on in the North Atlantic. You just don't hear about storms, hurricanes in the North Atlantic holding on for this long before zooming off to Europe. It is strange, the weather, but I think the bigger anomaly this year has been the dry air. I mean, all the water out there is 80 degrees, and that's all you need for a hurricane to form, a tropical storm to form. But I just think it's been so amazing that this dry air has held on and held on and held on. And, there's still a little bit out there, and yet somehow Earl is holding on. And then we've got these two other disturbances that might eventually form into something. So it's a head scratcher of a year. So many times over the last several years, we've had a really good handle on how things are going to play out. And this year, we're kind of wondering, wow, so many different things are happening than what we thought. It kind of keeps all the scientists in check that, this is still an act of predicting the future.
It keeps us humble. And I think there are going to be a lot of dissertations on this season. A lot of PhD dissertations on this.
How about this?
I'm going to let you handle that. I'm
not doing it. No, I'm too old for that.
Kelly Sue from my Facebook page saying #KJB. The Gulf looks like it's for quite a bit of tropical moisture, talking about what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico. We are getting a lot of storms here in Tampa Bay, and we have another more local question focused on the West Gulf side of Florida. Lisa Lambros from WFLA's Facebook page, #KJeff. Do you think the west side of Tampa will be affected by a storm this year? I'll bring up Jeff and Rebecca for this one as far as our section. And this is what we're talking about here on Tropical Satellite. A lot of moisture in the Gulf, but no tropical development here, clearly, guys.
Yeah, so I'll just say I'd be extraordinarily rich if I knew the answer to that question, if we were going to be hit by a hurricane in Tampa. It's hard to know. I don't know how it's going to work out. I'm a little concerned that the season, Rebecca, might be slightly backloaded, meaning that we see a lot of the activity happen on the back half of the season rather than the front half. And the back half of the season is when we be hit more directly on the west coast of Florida. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping it's not the case. But in terms of that moisture you see in the Gulf, why don't you take it, Rebecca?
And so we're about to transition into a much wetter weather pattern locally here in Tampa. You can see why. We've got all that moisture across the Gulf, and we're about to switch wind patterns. We're going to get an onshore flow, so winds from the west. So essentially, over the next several days, westerly winds are going to be pushing waves of rain over us, starting along the coastline and making its way across the state for Florida. So we are going to be experiencing some tropical downpours, but no winds. It's just, unfortunately, a very soggy weather pattern that we're about to get into.
Guys, can I jump in real quick? Yeah, I was just looking at the long-range computer models for rainfall over the next couple of weeks earlier today, and both the Southwest United States and the Southeast United States kind of have bullseyes for above average rainfall. And that graphic that you're seeing right there, there's a hurricane west of Mexico on the Pacific side. That's going to bring some much needed rain to the West Coast. And what's the main reason why the Southeast gets rain this time of year? It's because of tropical moisture or tropical systems. So I think, as Rebecca, you're saying, yeah, much better rain chances in Florida the next couple weeks, and both sides of the country getting all this tropical moisture, lots of rain in the next couple weeks.
You know, I just want to mention, Wes was talking about the hurricane that's developing off of the west coast there, off the Baja of California, which is going to miss the west coast, but some of that moisture is heading in, as Wes mentioned. You know, Sacramento hit 116 degrees yesterday. They have never gotten above 110 degrees during the month of September, and they've done it a couple of times this month. 116 degrees is their all-time highest temperature ever, and it's September. It's not July. It's not August. So it's a crazy heat wave going on in the West right now. And the good and bad news, and I want to see how this is going to play out, is this moisture is going to deliver some much-needed rain for some of the West, especially Southern California. But does it inject just enough moisture into California so they end up with these thunderstorms, which are dry thunderstorms? You end up with more lightning. So now it almost exacerbates the situation. I'd be interested to see what ends up really happening, because it's not going to be a direct hit. It's going to kind of curve out. So they're going to get moisture, which is good, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Let's get to this next comment coming in, and a lot of comments coming in about Tampa Bay, and I'm curious to hear from all three of you about this, because we talked so much about storm preparedness. Roy wants to know, do you think the Tampa Bay area is really ready for a storm? From my experience, I think the area is way under prepared, and perhaps, as far as your region too, Wes, you can chime in on this. Are you ever really prepared for a hurricane? Are any cities really? I mean, look, we have talked at great length on this program in episodes past about how New Orleans has made such dramatic improvements in years past as far as building up their preparations and the levees and so on and so forth in Louisiana to prepare for those storms, for the big hurricanes that hit that area of the country. But just New Orleans aside, just the average American city, including Tampa Bay, including Tampa, how prepared are we for a major hurricane or a tropical storm?
Well, I don't want to hog this conversation, so I'll toss it to Rebecca, because Rebecca's very good. When it comes to prep, she's a pro.
And so I feel like we are behind the curve because so many people have moved to our area recently. We have a huge influx of new people that live here that have no idea what to expect. And also we changed our evacuation zones a couple of years ago based on flooding. And so people either have moved and don't know what evacuation zone they're in, or their evacuation zone has changed. I feel like that's a major hurdle to overcome. And that's just the first step of preparation is, are you going to stay or are you going to go? And so I think that we're behind the curve as far as that goes. And another thing that Jeff talks about all the time, which is so incredibly true, is most people think they've experienced a hurricane because they've lived through tropical storm conditions, but very few people have actually experienced a hurricane itself in Florida, much less a major hurricane, because the areas that have seen that are so concise. And so people assume that it will be like the last time or like the last storm, and that's certainly never the case.
As far as Raleigh, Wes, you're more inland, of course, in North Carolina, but you want to answer the same question about storm preparedness?
So I feel like, we just had the 30th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew, and that storm changed so many rules for local government and municipalities. And I think since then we've been on this climb where local communities, government infrastructure is as ready as we can be for this massive destructive storm coming. I think where the problem lies is, and Rebecca, you mentioned this, so many new people moving to an area, but even the people that have lived here a long time, I mean, the storms for us, Matthew and Florence and Michael, flooding's a big problem here. We cover the coast a lot along the Carolinas here in Raleigh. But so many people, no matter how many times we say to get ready for a storm, even when a storm forms and we're watching it, it's 5 days away and 4 days away, people don't take action until they absolutely have to. And what is that, a day before, the day of sometimes? So I think that aspect of human nature, I don't know if will ever change, but I think that is always such a big barrier, because when
we're reactive, not proactive.
Yeah.
And,
and then when we're reactive and, I don't do anything to prepare for a hurricane, and then the municipality has to come in and help me and save me and whatever, that's where the problems lie. And I just think that's a way of sociology. We could do a dissertation on that. That's just how people are.
As we've talked about so many times on Tracking the Tropics, better to be proactive than reactive. Of course, a great point. Jeff, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just, so I've lived most of my life here in Florida, but I've lived up north as well. And what you notice is when areas get hit by storms that haven't been hit recently, a lot of trees fall because the infrastructure, and I say infrastructure, I mean buildings, but I also mean houses, trees, whatever, power lines, haven't been tested. The Tampa Bay area hasn't seen a major hurricane in over 100 years, and the one that did hit Tarpon Springs. So I really do wonder how good our infrastructure is. Now, obviously, Wes mentioned this after Hurricane Andrew, the building codes changed. With all that said, there's still a lot of structures that were built way before that. There's a lot of old trees, especially in South Tampa. But I would be interested to see how our infrastructure does, being that it is basically untested. We have dodged bullet after bullet after bullet after bullet in the Tampa Bay area. And that also puts people to sleep to an extent too. When are you most prepared for a hurricane? Probably the day after one hits, because it's foremost on your mind.
And we hope, of course, it doesn't happen this year, but it feels like an inevitability, of course, when we're talking about tropical development, the storm is eventually going to hit this spot. Insert city name here. Let's get to the final 3 comments that we have here out of the Facebook Live comment section. And then before, of course, we wrap up this edition of Tracking the Tropics, our featured meteorologist today, Wes Hohenstein from CBS 17 in Raleigh, Courtney Estrada from the WFLA Facebook page, #HeyJeff. How unusually warm is the water up there in the North Atlantic? Wes, Jeff, you guys were talking a little bit about this. When we see this graphic and it says very warm, how warm is very warm?
Well, the actual temperatures, I don't know, but I can tell you up to 14 degrees above normal, which is insane, remarkable, extraordinary, astonishing, all those things. This is a marine heat wave. These rare marine heat waves have become about 20 times more likely over the past 40 years or so. So how hot is it actually? No, it's not hot. It's not like Florida water. Those colors just are basically telling you whether it's above normal or below normal. And in that zone, it's generally around 10 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. But there are some areas that are up to 14-ish degrees above normal. Fahrenheit, I should say.
Wes, Rebecca, anything to add?
I don't know. Wes, do you know the water temperatures up there? I tend to look at.
Not.
We tend to look at anomalies. Yeah.
I look at anomalies more than anything. We've got, that's a whole other, that's Canada's problem, the North Atlantic. We've got our own issues on the East Coast and in the Gulf, don't we?
Yeah, the water temperatures anywhere from North Carolina northward to Canada have just been off the charts the past several years. I mean, water temperatures are warming very, very quickly there.
Let's get to this one from Mikey Cunningham, #HJB. What month usually has a Category 4 or Category 5 in each hurricane season? I brought up some records here while this question was in our queue, but if anybody wants to hop in here and just kind of talk about what month is more prevalent for not the quantity of storm, but how powerful of a storm that we actually get.
Well, 46% of major hurricanes happen in the month of September. As far as 4s and 5s, I can't be specific, but in terms of Cat 3s, 4s, and 5s, major hurricanes, it's somewhere around 46% of major hurricanes happen in September.
And I'll read here from the list. Hurricane Sam in 2021, which didn't really impact land here in the United States. That was late September. Ida was August. Iota back in 2020 was November. Ada was also November as well.
Or a couple weeks before,
yeah. A couple weeks before that. Yeah. So really, basically what I'm seeing on this list is August, September, October, and then you'll get the very occasional November Category 4 or 5 hurricane as well.
Yeah, last year, so Iota and Ada both, I think, hit in November. Which was not last year, was the year before last year?
2020,
2 years ago.
2020.
Those storms were crazy because they hit within 15 miles of each other and were absolutely devastating to Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. Displaced 500,000 people. 500,000 people had to find new homes after that, at least temporarily.
And as far as the strength of hurricanes so far this year, we're up to Earl on our ABCs. I don't think that we have had one escalate to Category 3 status. No, right?
Earl might tomorrow, but it's still a Cat 1.
Wow. Yeah. So here we are. We're approaching the peak of hurricane season. You see it there on the center of your screen. The peak is September 10th, and yet to have, and hopefully we don't have a major hurricane of note to talk about, at least one that's going to impact us here in the United States. Our final Comment comes in from Dan Stevens on the WFLA Facebook page, hashtag Hey Rebecca. Maybe Rebecca and Jeff have brought us a little bit of good luck this year. Wes, you're an OG with us here on Tracking the Tropics, going back to our original season. So maybe Jeff and Rebecca are just good luck.
Maybe. Now, if one of these storms does a U-turn and comes straight for the East Coast, you'll know that I'm bad luck. But I think the more important thing, are Jeff and Rebecca good enough luck for your Tampa Bay Bucks to actually win the game this Sunday?
Yeah, fingers
and I kind of need to
crossed.
know that for my survivor pool, by the way.
We will, of course, hoping for the best for Brady and the Bucks. Wes Hohenstein, everybody, give him a follow, folks, on social media. Wes, the final word is yours. What are you looking for as far as tracking the rest of the month of September?
Well, one of two things are going to happen. And when we didn't have any tropical systems in August, had a lot of time to do a lot of research. So there were only 2 other Augusts since 1950 where we did not have any named storms form. One of them was 1961. The other one was 1997. If you didn't know, we didn't have any named storms this past August. So we looked to some other Augusts that were similar to find out what's going to happen. In 1961, there were 11 named storms after August. 5 major hurricanes out of those 11. So that got really busy. 1997, not so much. We only had 3 named storms after August, 1 major hurricane for a total of 8 storms all year. So is the rest of this year going to be really busy like 1961, or is it going to be not so busy like 1997? And the way things look right now, are we headed for another 1961?
We can only hope that we're heading closer. That's a fascinating bit of history. Hoping we're closer to 1997 than we are.
I agree. I'm with you.
61. Guys, give him a follow. CBS 17 Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein joining us, our featured meteorologist on this edition of Tracking the Tropics, live every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, on whatever app, website, or social media platform that you are watching on. We are also live when storms form. We feel like you need to know about something really quickly. Our team here is on standby to let you know the very latest. We will do pop-up episodes as necessary. So I'd like to thank Wes, Rebecca, and Jeff, as always, here on this edition of Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing. We'll see you next time, folks, from your hurricane headquarters. Take care.
See you guys.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.